Welcome to Silicon Valley Life. In each episode, you'll get an insider's look at what makes Silicon Valley special, how people pursue ideas, deal with failure, and enjoy life. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, concordiaventures.com. Now, here are the hosts of Silicon Valley Life, Naeem, Zafar, and Meena Meyyappan.
Well, hello everyone. We are back live, and Meena and I are back with another episode of Silicon Valley Life. And today we have the pleasure of having Dave Matheson with us. He's the CEO of SmartOrg. We'll talk to Dave in more details here. Meena, how have you been? How was your week?
How's my week? It's actually been a great week. We're experiencing spring for a few days, spring and summer. One day it was spring-like, one day it's summer-like, and I enjoy the weather. I'm just not looking forward to the weekend where they say it's going to get gloomy and rainy. So I'm really enjoying every bit of the outdoors. That's where I am. What about you, Naeem? What have you been up to?
No, it's a springtime in Silicon Valley, so we're all excited. We can, 74 degrees outside. Wonderful. Which brings me to Mr. Dave Matheson, because I don't know too many people who live in Silicon Valley who grew up in Silicon Valley. And Dave is one of the neighbors of Palo Alto, where Stanford University is, and heart of Silicon Valley. Dave, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? And what do you do?
Well, so I'm David Matheson. I make my living as the CEO of SmartOrg. SmartOrg is a decision sciences company that helps large companies manage their innovation and growth investments. We have a combination of software and services and help companies with managing their portfolio of investments, where and how much to invest and drive growth, and also managing their innovations. How do you take the crazy, wild, wonderful, and make them into something that you can really invest in from a corporate point of view? That's my main gig. I have a side gig as the president of the Society of Decision Professionals, which is a large professional organization with like 13 chapters around the world. Their mission is a great decision every time, and it's the World Forum on Decision Making. I've been involved in that for a long time, and I'm currently serving as president. It's a great organization. Nobody's heard of it, so hopefully I'll get the word out.
Decision making, like what kind of decisions? Are like where to go on vacation, where to put your schools in which college, what?
Well, so yes, there are three broad constituencies. One would be kind of corporate decision making. So that's stuff like corporate investment or capital investments, or the work I do, which is around innovation and growth investments. Another major constituency is essentially social decision making or governmental decision making. So think of like design of health systems or remediating offshore oil rigs. This kind of stuff with multi-stakeholders and political actors. And then the last constituency is essentially personal decisions. And the biggest sort of category in that is actually child development. How do you help adolescents grow into adulthood as agents, through decision-making skills? Because kids don't realize that they're captains of their circumstances and they have decisions to make, and they have to sort of grow into that. And the decision sciences kind of approach can be very helpful in that step in child development. So that's another big area.
David, I want to step back a little bit. We talk a lot about Silicon Valley life. I just want to focus a little bit on your roots in the Valley, right? Give us a full inkling of what your roots are in the Valley, and how you go about doing what you do.
Yeah, well, so I grew up in Palo Alto on a street surrounded by entrepreneurs. I mean, there were entrepreneurs everywhere. And there was always something going on. I mean, I didn't know how amazing it was as a little kid. You'd bump into people and you'd later learn just how famous they were for this kind of stuff. And I think I can illustrate maybe what it was like with a little picture here. If I may share something here. I went to a little school called Peninsula School, which is this sort of play in the mud, child-focused school. And this is the tree fort, if we could put this on the share here. So tree fort at Peninsula School. And you can just look at this place and see what this was like. And this, in about first grade, I fell out of this tree in a big way and knocked myself unconscious, and I had a concussion, and I had to be monitored for a week. And it was both terrifying and also exhilarating. And I spent a lot of my youth climbing trees like this, and I got more than just a concussion. Yeah. And so I don't think a lot of folks have opportunities to do this, but it's sort of illustrative of the environment of just entrepreneurship, people trying things. Everyone had their own tree. They were all climbing it. They were falling it. They were getting back up and climbing it again, and so on. So it was very exhilarating that way to grow up here.
That is so awesome. Like having this kind of an experience is unique in this valley, I would say. Not a people who have to build a tree house, jump onto it, jump off it. That sounds like a lot of fun.
Isn't it also a metaphor for entrepreneurship?
Yes, exactly.
Getting up, falling down, and nobody blames you for falling down.
Exactly. And I think you can see maybe how the valley has changed in a way. So I would not personally want to live anymore on the street I grew up on because it's lost its vitality. Palo Alto has, speaking in generalizations here, basically the entrepreneurs have been replaced by the VCs, the money. And so the people here aren't the crazy doers. They're the people who fund them and sit in judgment over them and try to get them to do things. And it's a completely different kind of vibe. I'll give you an example. My kids went to a local school here called Escondido. And there was an incident where somebody's walking in with a dog, and there's a kid who's terrified of the dog. And the mother kind of freaks out in a sort of moneyed, entitled way, calls the principal on the carpet right in front of everybody and says, you can't have this. This is unsafe, blah, blah, blah. And the principal, very steely eyes, looks at her and says, this is a child development organization. Right. Learning to deal with animals is an important part of that. No dog is allowed here that's unsafe. This one is a safe dog. So if you don't like that rule, then I suggest you find another school. And I thought he just stared. It was the perfect answer. The next principal was a bit more jumpy. And when faced with similar criticisms, there was a beautiful tree in the kindergarten, a small tree, maybe 8-10 feet high with lots of little branches. Kids have been climbing that for generations. And when some kid got hurt, she put up a fence around it and said, this is unsafe. And eventually over a couple years, she, the balls that kids play with, somebody threw a ball at the wrong time, hurt somebody. She put them in ball cages. And so at Resource, you had to go out and unlock the ball so the kids could go play Foursquare. I mean, it's just like there was too much structure and a kind of rigidity that came through the kind of moneyed entitlement. And so I think Palo Alto has in fact lost something important in all of this.
Dave, tell us something about people which you did see growing up in Palo Alto, whether they were people walking around, neighbors. Do some name dropping.
Well, so the most startling one as a kid, the school I was at had a spring fair, and it was like a stupid little craft fair. I mean, a wonderful craft fair, but just a kid thing. And there was always this pickup band, and they would sing folk songs and play music. And I thought, oh, that's pretty good. I learned later that the leader of the pickup band was Joan Baez, who was a parent in the school. I had no clue as a kid. Or maybe when my kids were around, there's a playground nearby, and I'm playing with my kids, and I'm being the dumb dad with the video camera, and I'm watching my kids do stupid kid things. And there's a guy across the playground from me, and I look at him, and he looks familiar, and he looks at me, and I get this sort of concerned look, and I realize it's Steve Jobs. So he's like 50 feet from me playing with his kids, and he looks at my camera, and he just splits. And about 2 minutes later, I thought I should have just put my camera down. I don't care that you and I are just dads in the playground. I am watching my kids. But this guy actually has to be concerned for his security and his family's. I mean, to him, I looked like a real threat, even though I wasn't. And it's just a kind of encounter. You see that a lot with fame or various folks. You see Steve Jobs shows up in many places, but this one I think is kind of poignant because it shows the sort of upside as well as the dark side of having standing like that.
No doubt. It's interesting. Hey, let me switch gears a little bit. because you have a different perch, because you're sitting in the boardrooms with the large companies, which are spending hundreds of millions or tens of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And you're sitting in that room saying how the money should be spent. So give us some insight how large companies approach innovation, technology. Is it different than startups? Is there a lesson to be learned here?
Well, I think there are many lessons, and I have much to learn. I consider myself a student of all this, but I'll tell you a few things I've seen that are tremendous contrast. It's been very fashionable lately in the large corporates to take lessons from Silicon Valley, and I think that's basically correct around agility and learning and so on. But it often goes too far because there's a way in which the venture backer is not vested in the company. So a venture backer is a financial participant. They certainly want it to succeed. So from a legal point of view, they own pieces of it. I'm not trying to say that, but they're like in the breakfast analogy. These are chickens, and the startups are eggs. Okay, if you're a big corporate, you're a pig, and your innovation is ham, right? It really is part of you in a different way. And this is what I'm trying to get at with my clumsy word, vested. So because of that, a large corporate either has to make it work or not. And they can't, they do take risks, they take tremendous risks, but they can't just take these sort of long shots. They actually have to make it work. And if it doesn't work, they have to deal with the people and the aftermath. The Silicon Valley has a kind of disposability in it that I think colors a lot of how startup goes. It's both a great source of success, and you can reach for the stars and sometimes get them. And it's also a source of the dark underside of Silicon Valley. I've met many young folks who are here living the Silicon Valley dream, which is a bit more like playing the lottery. I mean, yeah, you can get super rich, but mostly you don't. And so it crushes a lot of dreams at the same time. And I think they do produce different results too. I mean, we've seen tremendous transformation from Silicon Valley startups and the growth in these kinds. And we've also seen real steady progress. I don't think people in Silicon Valley realize how important and how technologically advanced things like agriculture are, or power production, or it's just we live in this bubble and are actually a bit naive about how the whole world works. So, but that's
David,
the big
I'll
difference.
make you pause a bit here and talk about
Yeah,
a little
please.
bit about the trends you've seen, particularly because, as you mentioned, the innovation that you're seeing, right? A few things you can share with us, because we share a few innovation trends that matter to everybody around here. So on that note, before we go a little further, can you share
Yeah,
some?
of course. Of course. I mean, there are trends hitting all of us. I'll pick some that maybe are a little less obvious. I mean, AI is high in the hype cycle right now, but let's move to the implications of agriculture. So there's tremendous forces for tech change in agriculture. Some of it's being driven by AI and big data. So you can now automate farms in a way you never could. But there's an industrial revolution going on in biotechnology that has completely transformed our food production system and continues to do so. And so the way these technologies work into stuff that actually matter. I asked my kids once what was more important, the internet or electricity, and they voted for internet. And I thought, hey, maybe they don't really understand how this works. And if I had to pick among internet, electricity, or agriculture, I think I'd pick agriculture, right?
Yeah.
And it's staggering what's going on. And these folks are dealing with change of a scale that is just massive. And it doesn't, and these are large organizations, they
Right.
operate at huge scales, and they keep us all fed. So,
Right.
Give us some example, anything specific, some example for us to understand it better.
Well, so for example, let's talk about robotics in agriculture. So most crop, let's say, pesticides or something like this are sprayed on in large quantities, right? And they go kind of everywhere. And when you design this chemistry, what you want to do is make sure that it's very selective. It only hurts the things you want them to hurt, and it hurts nothing else. Okay. And they do a really good job of it, I have to say. And there are some problems. So I'm not trying to be an apologist, but it's actually amazing what goes on. Well, so if you have a robot, though, you've got to basically, to speak a little roughly, you've got a squirt gun, right? And the robot hits the bugs with the squirt guns. And so the whole chemistry system is much different. The scale, I don't need gallons and gallons of this stuff. I need little bits. I can remediate it. The squirt gun can go once and then come back and squirt again. The possibilities are just like endless. And that's one of many kinds of examples in agriculture. And I think just the point is that the tech trend is really structural change is happening everywhere. It's like we think we're unique in this respect, and we are certainly powerful in the Valley. And there are implications for technology really everywhere. And it's not just the computers, it's a lot of other things related to. So that is a big trend, dealing with change, disruption, renewal. Yeah.
Yes.
So, by the way, people who are live audience, feel free to enter comments. We can address some of the questions coming from you as well. Since we are live, that's a benefit. But yeah, you're right, David. I just talked to a company called Bowden, and they attach a little doohickey to a tractor. So in between the rows, they're zapping all the undesired weeds with a 70,000 volt jolt. So no chemical, and simply just jolting the bad stuff out. Who knew?
Who knew?
Yeah.
Or you look at something like what the oil industry calls the energy transition. Yeah. So that again is a huge sea change in how we get energy. I mean, it's naive to think we can reduce dependency on fossil fuels overnight. I mean, we need to reduce quickly, but you can't just turn it off, right? Yeah. And so like how you actually manage that turns out to be an incredibly disruptive. Can you imagine being in business where your job is to sort of undermine your current business? I mean, that's you got to think of the heroism of being able to do that is tremendous. And they're facing tremendous. So they're kind of everywhere, these kind of huge structural shifts, and how people deal with disruption and change and renewal is a common theme everywhere.
So talk about.
Naeem, I will share some innovation that will really surprise all of you. I've been reading a research paper that's being published by the universities here. It's about the human being and how consciousness is not, they're researching consciousness is not really tied to the brain. So there's been a lot of studies on people when they are just taken off the study is usually what happens. So just to explain to everybody step by step. So when your heart stops beating, it stops supplying oxygen and blood to the rest of the cells, which is including your brain. And it goes through a period called flatlining, which is basically it's almost end of life. And then the brain is going to die very quickly too, because it can't manage without the oxygen and blood supply. And during flatlining, you can still resuscitate a body. So I mean, a person can come back live from anywhere from a few seconds to 6 hours. They have resuscitated people. So that's when you hear a lot of afterlife stories. But this one goes further. The research shows exactly how as soon as the flatlining is almost, the brain is almost dying, you can see all the neural activity of the brain is much higher than when a person was alive. There is so much happening on your areas of, empathy, thinking, dreams, all of that is highly activated and is showing that something else is happening and is related to consciousness. So they are working further to prove that there is a point you can extend somebody's life and consciousness is beyond just the brain. So I just wanted to share that because I thought it was fascinating that we're going from food, just to AI and robots helping us every day be better people, to our food and how to make it much more innovative without the labor involved. Let's talk about our health. And so I just thought I'll add that last bit there.
Yeah. So Dave, what are you going to comment? I was going to next.
Well, I think health is another massive area. I mean, like the COVID vaccine is an mRNA vaccine. And what a lot of people don't realize is that is a massive, massive technological breakthrough. It's a programmable vaccine. We have only begun to see the implications of that. And it has yet to work its way through our systems. But it was invented from COVID. And now it's just, I mean, the health things are amazing too.
So talk a little bit about the book you wrote. Why did you have to write the book and what is it about? And tell us more.
Well, perhaps let me back up a step in my life to kind of frame the book. So I started life as I came out of undergraduate loving physics and math, and I got my dream job at Xerox PARC, Palo Alto Research Center, where I was doing bench work, putting transistors on glass before that was done, every day in your pocket. So I was doing, real bench work. And I learned two very, very important things on my first real job. First one is bench work is fun for a couple of weeks. but maybe I wasn't going to have a career at bench work. Everywhere I go, I get the lab tour, but I'm not going to do that day in and day out. The second thing I realized was Xerox PARC has a history of just spectacular failure in the face of overwhelming success. It's like they invented things you've heard of, like maybe computer networking or the desktop user interface, and many, many, many others. And it occurred to me, being a technology-oriented guy, that a great technology and a compelling customer value proposition were really necessary to change the world, but Xerox proved that they weren't sufficient. So what's missing? And that was a very disrupting moment for me as an early professional. Like I lost my way. And so I started to seek this question, what's missing? And so this took me in a different direction. In graduate school, I went to Stanford and essentially studied organizational decision-making. So this is a combination of, you'd say, the math theory of decision-making called decision analysis, the psychology of decision-making. So, Danny Kahneman, Nobel Prize winner, died a few weeks ago. He was inventing cognitive biases back in the 80s when I was doing this. So studied that, organizational decision-making. How do organizations really work? By the way, the headline is the way people describe they work probably is only approximately how they actually work. And the role of computers in this sort of thing. And so this is the work I was doing. I was very excited. I became a frustrated academic, though, because academics in my field weren't publishing in the areas I was interested in. So I couldn't get in. So I went to a consulting firm instead. I had a wonderful time. I found that I could talk to scientists and talk to business people and translate. So this was sort of my superpower. And I worked in doing corporate strategy and portfolio investments and all these things in and around how technology is used in business. Now, because I was a frustrated academic, I started studying them and eventually did some benchmarking studies in best practices for decision-making in R&D. And I discovered a bunch of best practices along with my co-authors and colleagues, which we published. And then the people we're collaborating with in companies came back and said, we can't seem to execute these. What's missing? So we studied that further. And let me give you a kind of example. So if you're in a situation of high uncertainty, a well-known best practice is not to make assumptions, but rather to use ranges of uncertainty. So it's very standard. There are many variations in this practice, but it's pretty clear. Well, people have a lot of trouble with that. And so when we looked further, we discovered something we called an organizational principle. And the thing is that in a way, companies don't want to do this. They don't want to embrace uncertainty. So we made a principle. You have to have circumstances in which you actually want to embrace uncertainty. You say, well, who wouldn't want to embrace uncertainty? Well, what many people in organizations want is a reliable promise. All right, I'm going to give you my $5 million or $10 million, whatever I do. And what's the promise you're giving me? Give me a reliable promise. And that reframes uncertainty as sort of the chance you won't deliver on your promise, which will lower people's aspirations in large companies. And the other thing is in innovation, the uncertainty is usually upside. It's not downside. And so it masks this whole thing. And so this is what the book is about, is sort of some basic patterns on how decision-making goes wrong at a kind of underlying assumption level. So we called those principles. And these are the principles of a smart organization, we called it. The book was published in 1997. I've continued to pursue that and refine those ideas in my career. The book's still pretty good. I mean, I think I'd do some things differently, but in particular, this idea of embracing uncertainty has just gotten more and more important as I've worked through things, how much people don't want to do that and avoid it, and their coping mechanisms and all that just creates tremendous dysfunction.
Yeah.
David,
So that.
No, I just want to pinpoint a little bit on what you said on uncertainties, right? The way that big companies and small companies approach this uncertainties is very different, right? Because big companies are more like, it takes a long time to bring some changes around. Smaller companies can move quicker, right? So what is your experience from that? If you can share some tidbits there.
Well, I have a friend of mine just started a number of startups. The most notable one was one called, I can't remember the name of the company right now, but they invented a product called, they commercialized a product called Mosaic, which then competed with Netscape and the internet wars and browser wars. And I'm, a good friend with this guy. And I said, Tim, let's do my uncertainty thing. And he said, we have one strategy. We either succeed or fail catastrophically. So, the die was cast, and there wasn't a lot of ability to really deal with the uncertainty. They were just on a rocket, and it was going to get into orbit or it was going to explode trying. Now, if you go to a big company and you look at, well, let's go back to the robots, right? And spraying chemistry, right? So the companies that actually can operate at the scale, in fact, have massive investments in existing capital infrastructure to make these chemicals. And they can't do it all themselves. They have to put different pieces together. So if a company goes and invest, well, you've got your electric zapper, right? So they go invest a lot of money in that zapper. Well, then they're the zapper company, and it either works or it doesn't. It's catastrophic. I was just talking to a guy about a famous, well-known investment in agriculture that went sideways. They bought their way into software, basically, because they know software is important, but they couldn't manage the integration. And so it all sort of fell apart. Your sort of classic corporate horror story, but you can just see it's like if these things explode, there's a lot more, I don't know, collateral damage, I guess you could say. So they both have the ability to operate at a much more massive scale, which is hugely powerful in these big industries. I don't think people appreciate like the economy of scale running in agriculture or energy production or any of this. We tend to think small. And so these companies have both huge scale, and they're the pigs and it's ham. They're not the eggs. If it blows up, it's a problem. If a startup blows up, I mean, it's a problem, but it's like contained, right? So I think that's really the root of how these companies think differently about uncertainty.
Let me ask you, switching the gears here a little bit, about what does a guy living in Silicon Valley do for fun? What are some of the recommendations? Where do you like to visit, eat at?
Well, let's say I have lived in many places. I grew up here and then I left, and I've lived in many places for multiple years. And after about, 20, 30 years of wandering around, I came back because I'm a slow learner. And here's my lesson. The weather in Northern California really, really does not suck. So I think my headline is step outside, enjoy the environment. I mean, I lived in Boston for a while. I had a big house. I get lost in my own house. And then when winter came, you needed the big house because you couldn't go outside. I mean, you had to layer up and all that. I mean, you could. It was fine. It was fun to be outside, but it was a whole different orientation. So here, no matter what the weather, I just go outside. Right? It's raining. An umbrella, that's no big deal, right? And so I think a lot of what I think is great about living in this area is just that intimacy between the sort of cultural spaces and the outdoor spaces. So personally, what I really like to do is bicycling, mostly road riding, some of what's called gravel riding. And I got to say, you get out 5-10 minutes and you're in paradise. I mean, in 10 minutes, I can be in a forest. And, we live in this complicated world, all these business things going on, all this technology. It's very complicated, to be very stressful. You go out bicycling and you're in the trees and you hear the wild turkeys gobbling on the side. It clears your head, and it helps keep me grounded, gets me exercise, and makes me remember there's a way in which, what's really all this stuff we do for a living is important, but also kind of not important at the same time. Yeah. And so it keeps you grounded and motivated and so on. So I would.
I'm going to share something, David, with you. And I'm the other side of it. Whenever I ride my horse, I always I'm so frustrated with all those people who bicycle around there. Because it really means when you come zooming down on a bicycle and someone else is on the horse on the other side of a trail, we don't share well. I can tell you that for sure from experience. The horse turns around, gallops, because of the noise and speed you come.
Yes. Well, those aren't the road riders, because I don't think the horses are together. But I should share a little story about growing up. So my grandfather was a rancher out in Salinas, and when I grew up, there were horses were not uncommon in Palo Alto. I mean, they weren't they weren't common either, but they were around. And so I was taught to ride a horse as a sort of practical skill. David, you have to learn how to ride a horse. So as a kid, I learned to ride a horse. I enjoyed it and so on. And of course, it turned into an elite sport. And I rarely ride horses. I did get on one and I passed. I don't think I'm any good at it, but there is something about, there's something about the connection to the horse and nature. It's like, you've really got to work with that horse, right? And the horse is going to take you in a place, and it's a kind of grounding thing, which I appreciate what you're saying. And for you, the cyclist cruising by is the kind of distracting, disruptive elements, very exciting. But I think that's part of what I'm trying to say, right? It's like, we just don't get grounded. Whatever your path is, get outside and do it, right?
But give us some specific, either a place to ride or park, or a place to eat when people visit you from out of town. Give us some specifics.
Yeah. Well, so on bicycling, I mean, this very morning, I got up at about, 5:45, and I got on my bicycle and I rode up Page Mill and saw the sunrise. And I do this maybe every week or so. It is gorgeous. And you'd think I'm crazy, and I probably am, but it's not empty. I mean, there must have been a dozen people up there, and sometimes it's 20 or 30.
That's like an hour uphill
Yes.
to have a 35 skyline?
Yeah, all the way to Skyline, right? It's like an hour up and maybe 40 minutes back or something like that, or maybe an hour and a half up and 40 minutes back, something like that. Your mileage will vary. Yeah. I didn't start being able to do that ride. I mean, so, your mileage will vary, but just get out. I mean, you can't go too wrong. Or the Portola Valley Loop is a much more kind of simpler way to get started. In terms of like restaurants and things like that, I live near California Avenue in Palo Alto, and they've closed the street, and it is the best thing that's happened to Palo Alto in 10 years, as far as I can tell. Well, maybe I'm being hyperbolic, but it's fantastic. I mean, and there are some restaurants there. When people visit from out of town, I take them to, like, Palo Alto Sol is Mexican food like nobody from Texas has ever had. So that's a good place to go. Or nobody from anywhere else in the country is, or the Son of Wolf is completely different. Or Zareens. I mean, people don't understand there's a difference between Pakistani and Indian food. And here's this delightful environment. You get your tray and you sit down to people, and it's wonderful food, and it just sort of goes on, and you can stroll around and try different things. So those would be some of my favorites.
Yeah, Zareen got a Michelin mention also. What was the Mexican place you mentioned?
It's called Palo Alto Sol.
Sol, S-O-L, like sun.
S-O-L, like sun. And there's a family, and the daughter of the family started a restaurant next door called Son of Wolf, which is a sort of fusion restaurant. So you have things like lasagna, but in a sort of Mexican palate. And it's it's unique food, and they have really good cocktails. Those are my favorite ones on California Avenue. But there are many, many places to go. Those are some of the things I tend to take outsiders to, because they're really unique. Then being able to walk around that street is just delightful. Tarun Pizza is fabulous. Right. You can get good pizza lots of places. They have particularly good pizza, but that's a good one.
Anything on the books you recommend, podcasts? Any other recommendation?
I'm listening to a podcast right now I find extremely informative about the modern era. It's called Empire. And these people are historians, and they go through, sort of without blinking, the history of empire. I'm on the third chapter. The first chapter is history of India and its relation to the UK. The second one is the Ottoman Empire. I learned that the Ottoman Empire's superpower, what made them build, was actually tolerance. That's what got them built up. And you don't realize these things. And then the fall is very interesting through World War I. And the current episode, or arc, is the history of slavery and empire. And it's much richer and more nuanced than most Americans would think. And I think it's really important to understand the dark side of the past and its full context, and also where that sort of brought us in a way. So I find this kind of thing endlessly fascinating.
This is totally fascinating to me. I'm working on a lecture right now, which is history of the empire and African colonization. So I went there. There are many empires that you're talking about. This is who does this? I found several empire podcasts.
I'd have to look it up. William Dalrymple.
Check.
And
I'll-
the woman's name I don't remember. If you want to go into decision science, one of my recommendation for the book of the century, I realize this is a little early because we're still early in the century, is Thinking Fast and Slow by Danny Kahneman, the Nobel Prize winner that just died. This is it's not a light book, but it's pretty readable. And the thing that's amazing, it's about cognitive biases. And the thing about this book is you read through it and you're like, that can't possibly be true. And then they'll have a little quiz and you do the quiz and you're like, I did so well. And you turn the page and he says, I bet you did this. Here's the error. And you're like, caught me every time and it makes you like every chapter I had to put down like, oh man, this is really me. And, it makes you think really differently. And the crazy thing is I work in graduate school. I work with this guy and then he wrote it up and it still gets me, right? It's like, so it's a wonderful book. So I'd recommend that one as well.
That's awesome.
That's beautiful. So Meena, we have come to the end. Any last thought before we close?
No, I think it's been an exciting episode, right? We've talked about venture capital. Now we talked about portfolio management, and it gives us a different perspective of what is all possible. Just because I think it happens in the Valley first, and then becomes more popular. I would say honestly, a great take on what portfolio management brings as a career to for other people. I would say, exciting.
Maybe I could leave. I would invite my audience to think. I learned my chops climbing trees and falling out. So I would ask you, what's your tree? And exhort you, get out and climb your tree and enjoy it. That's the entrepreneurial spirit. Go for it. Right.
That's the thought. That's a good thought to close on. But David, thank you so much for taking the time. Really enjoyed having you. Yeah. What's your tree? That's what you got to think about. So that's
exactly. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great way to close. What's your tree? I like it. I love it.
You've been tuning into Silicon Valley Life with your hosts, Naeem, Zafar, and Meena Meyyappan. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, concordiaventures.com. Thank you for your positive feedback, comments, questions, and for sharing this show with others.